Welcome back to the channel. In our last video we painted the Boar, the first of 3 heroes of the Imperium for my custom chapter. In part 1, we focused on updating the paint scheme, and the focus of part 2 is about how I want to paint the headdress and the crests. In my custom chapter, helms with crests from Terra's history are bestowed upon the heroes of the chapter. So now that the paint scheme has been updated, let's honor the Boar with an ornate headdress. Let's get started. I decided on a red and a black twist for the Torse and a black for the mantling. The base was a cool black gray, and our first layer is a dark gray. With this dark gray, I went over general points of the mantling and on the black twist sections of the Torse. In the past, I've painted cloth like any other part of a model, some blending and some highlights, yet I never attempted to create strands or striations in the fabric. Even in this video, I'm probably not using the correct sized brush. Yet, in the face of that, I wanted to try it anyways, which is one of the great things about this hobby. You get to try and you get to learn. You get to try and you get to learn. Every attempt you get to build up more skills. So when I start creating my initial striations, or seeable lines in the fabric, I used a neutral gray. This is both going to be a highlight as well as to show possible wear and tear on the material. Or at least enough to point out that this is a flowing fabric. With the mantling, I went with more horizontal streaks. For the Torse, I went with much more slanted streaks. I felt that this supported the look of a twisted up fabric. I also streaked the top of the mantling and tried to stay away from the Torse, in hopes that this would support a 3D effect for the material. I decided I wanted to try perpendicular streaks to see if that would support the effect even more. Though at this scale or with this brush, it might have been too much. Finally, I used a lighter gray, which was almost an off-white. I tried to do smaller or less streaks with this white, sticking to the highest or more active parts of the material. One thing I learned while painting this fabric was less is better. Just 1 or 2 streaks to get the point across, because at this point in my attempt, I felt I was adding too much texture. Almost like a dry brush effect was taking over the fabric. But it's good to watch clips like this. You can follow along with the technique up to the point where you like how it turned out, or if there's another direction you want to go with it. Hopefully watching me apply new techniques will make your journey easier painting your own models. So what I did for the areas that I found to be too busy or too light is I simply went back with my neutral gray and made streaks to push back the light gray so I can refocus its highlighting effect. The great thing about having a cleanup step is not everything has to be perfect the first try. You can always go back and repaint it. Pushing back those lighter streaks is making everything look a lot cleaner and a lot more focused. Once I felt good enough with this attempt, it was time to move on to the red. I used the same process I used for the red bolter, which was a dark brown base, then a dark red layer, followed by this lighter red for the general area. And to highlight the red fabrics, we're going to use an orange. Because this orange pigment is so thin, I had to go over the same streaks a few times. Then I used that same off-white that I used for the black fabric to go over the red as well as parts of the black I felt might need a little bit more of a touch-up. This also rebalanced the cleanup I did from before. With all of the mantle finished, let's move on to the important part. The crest. For the crest, I wanted to try something different. I wanted to try and make a dark and muted gold. Something very dry and burnished. So I played a lot with mixing black-gray pigments with a gold and blending it well enough until I could see the gold pigments in that dark gray. So with the darker mixture, I filled in the general areas, but making sure there's plenty of space for the plain gray to peek through. The basic lore or concept I was going off of for this Marine is that he gained this helm through some insane feat or holding his position and surviving against insurmountable odds. Even in the model's posture, you can see the weight of a walking tank. Throughout history, the boar has always been a symbol of strength, resilience, and martial prowess, which is why the crest of a boar is perfect for this Marine. We're going to add a second layer to make sure that the areas we covered doesn't have any of the base coat bleeding through. Once that's done, I added a little bit more gold into the mix, and I started hitting higher points on the model. Because this is the same mixture with a different ratio, this ends up blending really well together. There's not too much that I have to do. Watching this gold build up and seeing how reflective it is has been a really fun process to paint. The gold really dances with whatever angle you are looking at the model from. I'm really proud with how this is coming out so far. So before I move on to the highlights, we're going to catch up the rest of the headdress and work on the metal tips. Just going through the same process of using a dark gold mixture, adding a second coat to the higher areas, and adding our second layer with more gold in the mix. I went back to the headdress to clean up a few areas. And for the highlight, I actually mixed in a little bit of silver. This made sure it was still a gold pigment, but it really lightened it up without sacrificing any of the dryness, or the model being overpowered by a pure silver. All I was doing was highlighting the highest areas on each segment, which really helps this become more reflective. The gold on its own holds most of the effect, but with a hint of silver, it helps your eyes show when the light is going over the ridges and higher details of the crest. And just adding the same effects to the metal tips. And the headdress is finished. This is really looking great, and applying this technique was really fun to do. All that's left is to paint the ridge and the shield on the front of the helmet, which we're going through the same process. However, since these are just flat surfaces, I more lightly traced around the area and tried to leave at least some of the dry gray available to the area. The shield I may add heraldry later on, but for now it's just going to stay the gold we've been creating so far. Just adding in that second layer. Going in with some blending. I decided to add a strong tone wash to the more detailed or shadowed areas of the crest. In my last video, I tried the same wash on the recesses of the Aquila, yet on such a flat and forward surface, it actually took away detail. However, here we have a lot more space to decipher between where the light is hitting and where it isn't. So while the light hits the top of the model, the dark gray creates enough of a shading effect. But for smaller details and on the undercarriage of the model, we could add this strong tone to create more of a shading effect, without losing any of the detail. I also used it to separate the crest from the mantle, and to separate the metal tips from the leather. And going back over the mantle to create darker shading between the folds and layers of the moving fabric. And we are all done. This was such a cool effect to create. I feel that it really excites and accentuates the paint scheme. It has this more grimdark appeal to relics. It doesn't feel like it's fighting the paint scheme either. Sometimes gold and silver can stand out a little too much and really disconnects from the model, so I love how this turned out. That's all we have for today. If you want to watch how I created the paint scheme, check out my earlier video. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This headdress was a lot of fun to paint, and I'm definitely fired up to paint the other two heroes. Like and subscribe if you appreciated this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Phantom out.